I still remember the argument like it's carved into my memory. My friend Lisa and I had saved for months to book this cruise, promising each other it would be the trip of a lifetime. But halfway through, we weren't speaking. She thought I was being paranoid. I thought she wasn't taking things seriously. It started with small things. Her keycard going missing, her makeup bag found in the hallway. Then she swore she saw someone following her, a man in a blue jacket. I told her maybe it was just another guest. She laughed it off, but there was something in her eyes that told me she didn't believe her own words. The night before everything spiraled, we sat at the bar in silence. She kept checking the mirror behind the bottles, her shoulders tense every time the door opened. When I asked what was wrong, she leaned close, her voice low. He was outside our cabin last night, just standing there. I wanted to believe she was joking, but she wasn't the type to make something like that up. She described how she'd woken up thirsty, walked to the door for water, and saw a shadow through the peephole. A man, leaning against the wall, staring straight at our door. No knock, no words, just waiting. That was the last normal night we had, because the next evening, Lisa didn't come back to the cabin. Her purse, her shoes, even her ID, all left behind. And when I begged the staff to check the cameras, they told me she was last seen walking toward the stairwell with a man in a blue jacket. At first, I thought maybe she'd gotten drunk and passed out somewhere, but the longer the hours dragged on, the more the silence ate at me. Her phone was still charging by the bed. She never left it behind. I tried calling the front desk again, demanding they search, but they gave me that same calm, professional tone. "Ma'am, guests often stay out late. Please don't worry." But I couldn't stop worrying. I started walking the ship myself, checking every lounge, every deck. That's when I noticed it. Each time I turned a corner, I felt someone linger just out of sight. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a shuffle of footsteps stopping when I stopped. My heart raced as I turned suddenly on one of the lower decks, certain I'd catch them, but the hallway was empty. Only the faint hum of the ship and rows of closed doors. I barely slept that night. Every sound outside the cabin made me jolt awake. At some point, I heard it again, soft, deliberate footsteps pausing outside the door. I held my breath and pressed my eye to the peephole. For a second, nothing. Then movement. A figure leaned into view, too close, as if they knew I was watching. The glare from the hallway light made their face hard to see, but I caught it, the glint of a smile. Then they stepped back and walked away. The next morning, I went to security again. They told me Lisa had been seen entering the stairwell at 10:42 p.m., but after that, nothing. The cameras on the lower decks weren't working that night. A technical issue. I asked if they'd check the stairwell themselves, and one officer just looked at me with this strange expression, almost pity, before changing the subject. I felt sick. I wanted to scream at them, to force them to take me seriously. But part of me realized they already knew something. They just weren't going to say it. By the second day of her disappearance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was next. I kept the lights on, shoved the dresser in front of the door, but nothing eased the dread. I caught myself whispering out loud just to fill the silence. Every creak of the ship, every faint knock against the walls, it all felt like someone was waiting, watching, moving closer with each hour that passed. On the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I told myself I'd search the stairwell, the one the cameras weren't working in. Maybe I'd find proof. Maybe I'd find Lisa. My hands trembled as I walked down the quiet hallway, every step echoing too loudly against the carpet and steel. When I reached the heavy metal door, I hesitated. The air felt colder there, the hum of the engines duller, like the sound itself was being swallowed. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me first, damp, metallic, like rust and seawater. The stairwell spiraled downward into dim yellow light. There, on the landing, was her bracelet, a thin silver chain she never took off. My chest tightened as I bent to pick it up, my ears straining at the silence around me. That's when I heard it, footsteps above, slow, deliberate, moving closer. I froze, clutching the bracelet in my fist. The steps grew heavier, echoing against the walls, until I could almost feel them pressing against my back. I didn't dare look up. My legs shook, every muscle screaming to run. Finally, I forced myself to glance over my shoulder. A man stood at the top of the stairs, motionless, his face hidden in shadow. The same blue jacket. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, watching me like I was already caught. The silence stretched, my breath shallow and ragged. Then he smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, just a faint curl of his lips, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. I bolted. My feet pounded against the steps, my lungs burning as I shoved through the lower door and into another corridor. But when I turned to look back, the stairwell was empty. No footsteps, no chase, just the echo of my own fear rattling through the steel walls. I didn't stop running until I was back in my cabin with the door locked and the dresser shoved against it. My whole body was shaking so hard I could barely breathe. I clutched Lisa's bracelet in my hand, pressing the metal into my skin just to remind myself it was real. She had been there. Something had happened to her in that stairwell, and the man in the blue jacket knew it. The next morning, I went back to security. I placed the bracelet on the counter, my voice breaking as I told them where I'd found it, what I'd seen. The officer's eyes flicked down to the bracelet, then back at me, and he shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, passengers lose things all the time. Please calm down." It felt like a slap, like they had already decided the truth didn't matter. I wanted to scream, to demand they check the stairwell, but the words caught in my throat, because deep down, I knew they wouldn't. For the rest of the trip, I never left my cabin after dark. Every time footsteps passed outside my door, I held my breath, waiting for them to stop, waiting for a shadow to lean against the peephole again. I kept Lisa's bracelet hidden in my suitcase, the only proof I had that she hadn't just disappeared, that someone had taken her. And the worst part was knowing the ship would dock, everyone would go home, and Lisa's name would just become another missing passenger on a list no one ever really talked about. When I think about that trip now, what unsettles me most isn't just losing Lisa. It's how easily it was erased. The cruise line released a short statement, called it an unexplained disappearance, and that was the end of it. No real answers, no real investigation, just silence, like she had never even been there. I replay those moments in my head, the peephole, the bracelet, the man in the blue jacket, and I wonder if I could have stopped it. If I had stayed with her that night, instead of brushing off her fear. If I had opened the door when I heard the footsteps, I would have faced him head on. Maybe I wouldn't be haunted by the thought of what he did after I ran. But what haunts me more is the look on that officer's face when I handed him the bracelet. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look confused. He just looked tired, like he'd seen this before, like it wasn't the first time. That's what I carry now. Not just the loss, but the sickening thought that maybe this wasn't random. Maybe ships like that, with their dead zones and blind spots, attract people who know they can get away with things. Sometimes at night, I still see that faint smile in the stairwell, and I wonder, was I spared? Or am I just still waiting for my turn? I remember that night like it just happened yesterday. The air on the deck felt heavy, even though the sea breeze should have been refreshing. We were somewhere between Florida and the Bahamas, but the ocean felt endless, swallowing every sound except the steady hum of the ship. People were laughing, drinking, moving from one lounge to another, but for some reason, I felt separate, like I was being watched. Not from the crowd, not from anyone near me, but from somewhere I couldn't see. Every time I turned, nothing was there. Just dark water stretching into nothingness. I didn't think much of it until later, when I went back to my cabin alone. The hallway was empty, just rows of identical white doors under flickering lights. I remember sliding my keycard, stepping inside, and feeling that same weight again. That pressure, like someone else had just been there. My suitcase was slightly unzipped. My shoes had been moved. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, maybe I'd forgotten. But when I pulled back the blanket, I froze. The bed was still warm on one side. Someone had been sitting or lying there. The ship was so big, so full of people, yet I'd never felt more isolated in my life. I didn't report it. I just locked the door, shoved a chair against it, and sat awake until dawn listening for footsteps in the hallway. The second time it happened, I knew it wasn't my imagination. My cabin smelled faintly of smoke, like someone's cologne. My balcony door was unlocked, sliding open just a crack. I never touched that lock. I didn't tell anyone again, because what would I say? That I thought someone was sneaking into my cabin? On a ship with thousands of strangers, it could be anyone. And the terrifying part wasn't who it was. It was knowing they wanted me to notice. They wanted me to feel them there. It was years later when I heard about the girl who vanished on a cruise ship. Same company, same route, same eerie feeling of things not adding up. Her parents said she went to her cabin after dinner and never came back out. No one saw her leave. No cameras caught her. No trace of her belongings left behind. Just gone, like she had dissolved into the walls. Some people said she must have fallen overboard, but the currents that night didn't match. Others whispered darker things. Staff members who looked the other way. People who knew more than they admitted. What haunted me wasn't the mystery of how she disappeared. It was the stories other passengers started telling afterward. Tiny details that mirrored my own experience. Shoes moved. Locks tampered with. Doors left ajar. People laughed it off as paranoia. But too many of us had felt it. That quiet invasion of someone crossing into your most private space. Just to remind you they could. I still wonder if she ever noticed. If she felt that same warm dent in the bed. That same unlocked balcony. If she realized too late that someone wasn't just watching her, but waiting. Another trip, another ship, and I thought maybe it would be different. I booked with friends this time, swearing I'd never be alone on a cruise again. But the ocean has a way of isolating you no matter how many people are around. My friends went off to drink, and I wandered to the lower deck by myself. It was almost empty, just a few crew members moving carts, the sound of machinery humming deep below. That's when I noticed a door slightly open at the end of the corridor. Just a storage room, I thought. But as I passed, I heard something. A faint tapping. I told myself to ignore it, but curiosity pulled me back. Inside, it smelled like bleach and rust. Cleaning supplies stacked to the ceiling. And in the corner, a phone. One of those old corded ship phones. The receiver was off the hook, dangling. Soft static hissed through it. That's all. No voices, no messages, just static. But when I turned to leave, the door clicked shut behind me. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear anyone run. Just that heavy silence pressing in as I realized I wasn't alone in there. My chest locked up. I pushed the door hard and stumbled back into the hallway. But no one was there. The carts were gone. The crew members gone. It was like the whole floor had emptied out in those few minutes. I didn't tell my friends. I couldn't, because deep down, I knew whoever shut that door hadn't wanted me to find them. Not yet. The last time I ever set foot on a cruise ship was with my cousin. She worked long hours, saved for months, and this trip was her reward. We shared a cabin, and at first everything felt normal. But halfway through, she started acting differently. Nervous, jumpy. She told me she thought someone was following her, but every time I asked who, she couldn't explain. Just said she felt eyes on her, even when no one was there. On the 5th night, she didn't come back to the room. I searched the lounges, the deck, the dining hall, nothing. I begged security to check the cameras. Hours passed before they finally told me they found her. She'd been sitting alone in a stairwell, just sitting there, knees pulled up, staring at the wall. She wouldn't say what happened, wouldn't look me in the eye. It wasn't until weeks later, after we got home, that she finally told me. She said a man had slipped a note under our door one night. It only said 3 words, "I found you." She never showed me the note. She said she tore it up, flushed it. But every time I bring it up, even now, her face goes pale. Cruise ships are marketed as floating paradises, escapes from reality. But what no one wants to admit is how much control you lose the moment you step on board. Locked doors don't always stay locked. Cameras don't always catch what they should. And in the middle of the ocean, there's nowhere to run if someone decides you're the one they want. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe housekeeping had come by. Maybe I'd left the balcony unlocked without realizing. But the more I looked, the more it didn't add up. My toothbrush was wet, though I hadn't touched it since morning. A half-empty bottle of water sat on the counter. I hadn't bought any water. And when I checked my suitcase again, I noticed something missing. Just one shirt, a plain t-shirt I'd packed at the bottom. Gone. The human brain does something strange when it's scared. It looks for excuses, ways to make sense of things that don't feel right. I kept telling myself I was tired, that the ship was full of staff. Maybe someone had just made a mistake. But the truth was pressing against my chest like a weight. Someone had been in my room. Someone had touched my things. The next evening, I bumped into one of the crew members in the hallway. He smiled too quickly, like he'd been waiting for me. "Everything okay in your cabin?" he asked, his voice casual, but his eyes held mine a little too long. I nodded, forced a smile, and walked away. But the question echoed in my head. How would he know if anything was wrong? That night, I left the TV on for background noise. The glow of the screen made the room feel less empty, less vulnerable. I finally drifted off, but in the middle of the night, something pulled me awake. The TV was off. The room was dark. My heart sank, flicked it on, and that's when I noticed it. A folded piece of paper slipped just under the door. My hand shook as I picked it up. No words, just a crude smiley face drawn in black ink. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run down the hall and bang on the nearest door, but instead I locked the chain, pushed the chair against the handle again, and sat there shaking. Whoever it was, they weren't just breaking in anymore. They wanted me to know. They wanted me to feel their presence, even when they weren't inside. The worst part was the silence. I pressed my ear against the door, listening, but there was nothing. Not footsteps, not whispers, just silence. Like whoever left that note was still standing out there, waiting for me to open it. The night it all came to a head. I had barely slept. My body was buzzing with exhaustion, but my mind wouldn't quiet. Every creak in the walls, every faint vibration of the engines, felt amplified. Around 2 in the morning, I finally closed my eyes, and that's when I heard it. The sound of my balcony door sliding open. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I had checked that lock 3 times before bed. Slowly, without moving, I opened my eyes. The room was pitch black except for the faint glow of the ocean outside. The curtain swayed slightly as if someone had just slipped in. I couldn't move. My whole body locked up, waiting, listening. Then came the softest sound, a shoe scuff against the carpet. Whoever it was, they were inside. My chest burned as I tried to keep my breathing quiet, shallow, controlled. I reached slowly for my phone on the nightstand, but before I could grab it, the mattress dipped. A sudden, undeniable weight pressed down on the corner of the bed. My blood went cold. Whoever had been leaving the signs, whoever had been sneaking in and out, was sitting right there, inches from me. I wanted to scream, to run, but fear pinned me in place. I could hear them breathing now, steady, controlled, like they were waiting for me to react. Seconds dragged into an eternity. Then, as suddenly as it started, the weight lifted. The curtain swayed again. The balcony door clicked shut. I didn't move until dawn. When I finally found the courage to look, the only thing left behind was that same piece of paper from before, this time placed carefully on the pillow next to mine. But the smiley face was gone. In its place, 2 words written in small, neat letters, "Too late." When the sun finally rose, I still hadn't moved from the corner of the bed. My body was stiff, my eyes dry. But I couldn't bring myself to unlock that door. Every sound outside felt like a threat. The shuffle of footsteps in the hall, the knock of a cleaning cart against the wall. I waited until the morning announcements before I forced myself up. I shoved everything I owned back into my suitcase, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my clothes on the floor. I didn't care. I just needed to get out of that cabin. When I went to the front desk, my voice cracked as I asked for a different room. The staff looked at me with polite confusion, like I was overreacting, but eventually they moved me to a smaller cabin at the very top of the ship. I never told them the truth. I never said someone had been inside with me, that I'd felt the mattress dip, that I had proof, a note that still sat folded in my pocket. Instead, I kept it to myself, because if I said it out loud, if I admitted it really happened, I don't think I would have ever been able to step off that ship alive. Even now, years later, I can still feel that weight pressing into the bed, that moment when I knew I wasn't alone, and that whoever it was wanted me to know it. I've spent years trying to convince myself it wasn't real. That exhaustion made me imagine the sound of the balcony sliding open, the dip in the mattress, the breath on the other side of the room. But no matter how many times I repeat that to myself, I can still feel it. The heaviness, the certainty that another person was there. inches away, choosing to leave me alive. That's what unsettles me the most. Not that someone broke in, not even that they touched my things, or left notes like it was some kind of game. It's that deliberate choice. Whoever they were, they could have done anything. And instead, they decided to let me wake up, to let me carry the memory instead of the scar. Sometimes I wonder if that was the point. Not to hurt me, but to ruin the idea of safety. To remind me that even locked doors don't mean you're alone. That in a place surrounded by thousands of people, you can still be singled out, marked, and watched. I've never taken another cruise. I can't even stay in hotel rooms without checking every lock 3 or 4 times. But no matter how careful I am, sometimes at night, when the room is too quiet, I still hear that sound in my head, the weight sinking into the bed, the silence pressing in, and the thought that maybe this time, it won't leave me alive. The third time I went on a cruise, it wasn't my choice. My family insisted. It was supposed to be a healing trip after a rough year. I remember standing on the balcony that first night, the ocean stretching forever in every direction, and feeling this deep unease in my stomach. Everyone else was laughing, taking pictures, and drinking cocktails. But all I could think about was how far we were from land, how the only thing separating me from the black water below was a thin railing. My cousin Sarah shared the cabin with me. At first, she seemed fine, excited even, but by the second night, her mood shifted. She kept pulling the curtains shut, double-checking the lock on the balcony door. When I asked what was wrong, she said it felt like someone was watching her. I brushed it off, told her it was just nerves. But then I noticed it too. Every time we left our cabin, it looked different. Subtle things. The lamp tilted slightly. The bathroom door cracked open. My shoes moved closer to the bed. I wanted to believe it was housekeeping, but when I asked the front desk, they told me no one had entered. That night, Sarah woke me up, shaking me by the shoulder. Her face was pale, her voice barely a whisper. Someone was standing on the balcony. I jumped up, yanked the curtains open, but the balcony was empty, nothing but the sea swaying under the moonlight. Still, I couldn't shake the chill crawling up my spine, because the lock was undone, and I knew I'd bolted it hours before. That was the moment I realized this trip wouldn't be about healing. It would be about survival. The next morning, Sarah barely touched her breakfast. She just pushed the food around her plate, her eyes flicking constantly to the windows around the dining hall. When I asked if she was okay, she leaned in and whispered. He was smiling at me, through the glass. Her words made my stomach knot. I wanted to believe she was exaggerating, but she wasn't joking. She described waking in the middle of the night and seeing a man on our balcony, pressed close against the glass door. He didn't knock or move, just smiled at her, like he was waiting. I told her maybe it was another passenger who got lost, but deep down I didn't believe it. Our cabin was on the 8th floor. No one could have just stumbled onto that balcony by accident. That evening, when we got back from dinner, there was something waiting for us. A folded napkin left on the bed. No note, no signature, just a small, greasy fingerprint on the corner. My chest tightened. We hadn't left the room unlocked. Someone had been inside again, bold enough to leave something behind. I went to the front desk, my voice shaking as I explained what happened. The woman behind the counter gave me a practiced smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Sir, our staff do not leave items in guest cabins. Perhaps your cousin misplaced it. Sarah grabbed my arm and pulled me away before I could argue. Her hand was ice cold. They don't care, she whispered. They already know. That night, we dragged the dresser in front of the balcony door. We left the bathroom light on, too afraid of the dark corners. Still, I barely slept. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound, soft tapping on the glass. I held my breath, staring at the curtains, willing myself not to move. The tapping stopped, replaced by something worse. A low chuckle, muffled by the glass but unmistakably human. I sat frozen until the first rays of morning seeped through the curtains. When I finally dared to look, the balcony was empty, but smeared across the outside of the glass, in the faint outline of a handprint, were 4 words scrawled with something greasy, like oil. I see you. On the 4th night, Sarah refused to sleep. She sat upright in bed, clutching the blanket to her chest, her eyes fixed on the balcony curtains. I tried to calm her, told her we'd be home soon, but she just shook her head. "He's not going to wait that long. It happened," she whispered. A loud metallic scrape jolted us both, the sound of the balcony door being forced against the lock. The dresser we'd pushed in front shuddered violently. My stomach dropped. Someone was trying to get in. Sarah screamed, and I rushed to hold the dresser in place. My body pressed against it as it lurched forward with each shove from the other side. The sound of metal grinding against metal filled the room. Whoever it was, they were strong. And then, suddenly, it stopped. Silence, the kind that made my ears ring. I stayed frozen, gripping the dresser, sweat dripping down my face. Slowly, I leaned close to the door, listening. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, steady, just on the other side of the glass. Sarah was sobbing, begging me not to open the curtains. I didn't. I couldn't. But then came 3 knocks. Soft, deliberate, followed by a whisper so faint I thought I imagined it. Too late. The sound of footsteps faded, leaving only the hum of the ship. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When morning came and I finally pulled back the curtains, the balcony was empty. But on the outside of the glass, scratched faintly into the condensation, was a smiley face. By sunrise, Sarah was trembling so badly she could barely stand. I helped her pack her things, neither of us saying a word. The smiley face on the glass was still there, faint but undeniable, and I couldn't bring myself to wipe it away. It felt like proof, something real in a situation that still felt unreal. When we went to the front desk, I demanded to speak with security. They sent a young officer who barely glanced at us, writing down our complaint like it was routine. I showed him the glass, the scratches, the greasy handprint still clinging to the balcony door. He didn't even flinch, just said, "We'll have housekeeping clean it." That was it. No investigation, no questions, nothing. Sarah started crying, and I pulled her away before she collapsed on the floor. For the rest of the cruise, we barely left our cabin. We ate room service, kept the lights on day and night, and slept in shifts so neither of us would be alone. Every time I heard footsteps outside our door, my chest tightened, certain they'd stop in front of us. They never did, but the waiting was almost worse. When the ship finally docked, we were the first off. We didn't even look back. But even now, years later, whenever I hear a knock at night, I feel that same icy dread crawl up my spine, like I'm back on that balcony, listening to someone breathe through the glass. I thought leaving the ship would bring relief, that once we touched solid ground it would all feel like a bad dream. But it never did. The truth is, the ocean wasn't the scariest part of that trip. It was the realization that on a vessel carrying thousands of people, you could be hunted in plain sight, and nobody would care enough to stop it. Sarah never fully recovered. She avoids crowds now, avoids hotels, avoids anything that feels like a trap. I can't blame her. Sometimes I catch her staring at the patio door in our apartment, her eyes unfocused, as if she's waiting for that soft knock to come back. What keeps me awake is knowing how easily it could happen again. There were no cameras watching that balcony, no lock that couldn't be forced, no staff who would take us seriously. Whoever that man was, he knew it. He knew nobody would help. And maybe that's the most horrifying part. Not the knocking, not the voice, not even the smiley face. It's that feeling of being completely disposable, that no matter how much you scream, no one's really listening. I still wonder if he ever tried again, on another ship, another cabin, with someone who didn't push the dresser in time. Sometimes I'm afraid to look it up, because I don't think I want to know the answer.